Hello and welcome to our Reboot review. I'm Paul,
And I'm Dave.
and this week we are discussing the episode where no Sprite has gone before. This episode originally aired in Canada on September 24th, 1997, and was written by DC Fontana, who you probably don't know the name, Dave, but she wrote a ton for Star Trek. And that might come through in this episode.
Maybe just a tiny touch.
Anyway, let us move on to the number one song in America this week, Dave.
Hmm. Can I hope and pray that Honey from, again, on tip of the tongue, Madonna has finally been dethroned again, or she's still sticking on top?
It is still Honey by Mariah Carey.
Uh, Understandable, but still the case.
Alrighty, let us move on to the number one movie in America.
Hmm.
This one I'd be
Again.
surprised if you know. Because, like, considering even though that it has some stars in it, I've never heard of this before.
Okay. This is thinking on it. Um, but again, it's just sort of seeming that the end of this year is just not turning out that great for films. Just kind of last minute, fair certain things, but no title in my head's coming to mind for
Oh,
around that
I'm
time.
just going to say there's some bangers coming up later this year, but this one I don't remember.
Hmm.
Any ideas?
Yeah, still nothing.
Okay, it is a film called The Peacemaker, which is a super generic title.
Yeah, yeah.
But it stars George Clooney and Nicole Kidman. It is a political action thriller.
Which is a genre because with a couple of particular things, it's common nowadays, but like around that time, just the thought of it's kind of like supposedly that's a thing, but maybe it was something else entirely. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, apparently it's pretty good. Like,
Hmm.
okay, like it's a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes, which isn't great, but you know,
Hmm.
it did okay at the box office, earning 110 million against a $50 million budget. So
Hmm.
it might be okay. I don't know. I've never seen it.
Yeah.
Let us move on to video games, however, because by God, was this a week.
A decent week, or like this is the big game explosion of the year.
It's not the big one, but it's one of the big ones.
Neat. It's the start of the avalanche. Let's hear it.
Okay, so September 24th, which is the day that this episode aired in Canada, there were two major games that if you were a PC gamer, you could go pick up in the store. So, if you were a PC gamer at the time, you could walk into your local retailer and decide between two new releases. You could either pick up Ultima Online
Ooh, very big fancies.
or a game that was a game that was slightly more controversial, Postal.
Ooh. That was a thing.
It was a thing. Have you ever played Postal?
No, but I've heard about its reputation.
You have, hey?
Yeah,
It's
yeah. And also kind of the case of the one or two other companies around in the thousands or 2000s or so that were kind of like, oh, Postal did this thing. Let's go do this thing too, and failed utterly. In some cases for good reasons, and some reasons for bad reasons.
okay. So, can I just say first off, Postal, from what I remember of it, it's not very good. And I feel like like the controversy got way blown out of proportion to what that game actually was. But that is a discussion for another day.
So very true.
On September 26th, if you were a gamer, you could walk into your local retailer and again have a choice between two different major titles.
Competition is the best thing, is supposedly.
If you were an N64 gamer, you could pick up Bomberman 64.
Oh my gosh, the golden thingy of the law.
I love Bomberman.
Yeah.
And if you're a PC gamer, you had the option to pick up Lego Island,
Yes.
which
Because that is the thing. I'm just not sure how much of a thing it was, especially with that point, because Lego is a thing, but how much it was within the gaming verse. Yeah.
the Lego games didn't really become a thing until they started doing like the Lego games that you're familiar with. Right?
That
Like
would have been
they
like
did like the
maybe
Star Wars
mid
ones, the Indiana
2000s
Jones
or so, I
ones.
believe.
They had done games before that, but like that's where it really became mainstream.
Yeah, true. Because it was a thing that existed, but it was kind of also a thing of there was the one or two of them, but whether or not they really caught enough traction to kind of be more so than anything else, though. But still, very much an interesting thing there.
Yeah, like they had done a bunch of games before like the Lego games, but like they didn't really catch on until like Lego Star Wars.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so on, on September 29th, if you had a PC, PlayStation 1, or a Saturn, you could go pick up a little game called Croc Legend of the Gobos.
Oh my gosh, it's a croc.
I've never played Croc. I
It's
don't think.
nothing too groundbreaking as it is, but being one of the more traditional PlayStation platformers, he made somewhat of a name for himself, though. As it sits with many of the iconic platformers from the PlayStation, he only could stand through so much.
Well, and it feels like PlayStation, like Sony doesn't make those games anymore, with the exception of Ratchet and Clank.
Very much so. It was one of the ones that kind of had enough of the niche to still fit with most everything. They tried a bit with a couple of the other particular ones, but either supposedly they were too concerned with going in other directions and or going in different sort of directions entirely. Naughty Dog, please just make a different franchise that's a different from The Last of Us and or Uncharted, please.
Oh, make another Uncharted game.
Yeah, with how long it's been, possibly understandable. But additionally, you have so many things under your belt you can do
Oh yeah, but at the same
too.
time, also make another Jack and Daxter. Like,
Oh my gosh, yes. Though it's also been some time, so it's kind of the case of the only thing that kind of makes sense is to possibly do a reboot. There's not too much else I could really think of because if they continue with the story, oh god, where the heck's it gonna go?
well, no, I think it has to be a reboot at this point because like the last Jack and Daxter game was
Maybe 2010-ish, 13-ish. At least
uh
that's what's going in my head.
the last main one was 2009.
Okay, not even getting to there, but nah, still understandable.
They did the remaster collection in 2012 and something called the Jack and Daxter bundle in 2017.
Yeah, with those ones.
Yeah. Okay. So let us move on here to the next game we have. Oh, look. If you're a PC gamer, you could pick up a little game called Close Combat A Bridge Too Far, which I am not familiar with.
Like you said the name, and for a second I thought I knew, but now I don't. It's like the name rings somewhat of a bell, but it's also kind of the case of what the heck did he just say?
Oh, it looks like it's like a World War II like strategy game, like real-time strategy.
Maybe that's it. It was like maybe close to the first person shooter type game that came out later on, but it was still a case of this is still the not the late 90s and we haven't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah, not everything's a first-person shooter yet.
Yeah, not just yet.
Okay. So on the same day as Close Combat, if you're a PC gamer, you had, in my opinion, a much better choice.
Mm.
You could go to the store and pick up Fallout. The original Fallout.
Ah, yes.
Have you ever played like any of the early Fallouts? Like before
Not so
Bethesda
much,
took and made it
no.
a Bethesda game?
Not so much, no. It was a case that I've seen little bits of gameplay and some of the things about it. And it's the case of it's familiar to the types of other games I've seen played on the PC before, but just with either age or the story concept that was inside of it, just like, not too much my things.
Okay, fair enough. I really, from the little bit I've played of the original Fallout, I quite enjoyed it, but I haven't played it much.
Yeah. It's one of those things, unless it kind of gets your hooks into right at the start of it, yeah, it can easily kind of throw you off if it doesn't keep your interest.
Moving along, also on September 30th, if you were a PC gamer, you could pick up Panzer General 2.
Ooh. I think I might be getting the titles confused again.
So here's the fun part. You know how this game's called Panzer General 2?
Yes.
It's actually the sixth game in the series.
Possibly understandable, but also kind of the case of what were they thinking?
Okay. So the series started with Panzer General,
Yes.
then it went to Allied General,
Hey.
and then Fantasy General,
Hey.
and then Star General,
Hey.
and then Pacific General,
Hey.
and then Panzer General 2, and
How much
then
further are we going to go?
and then I'm gonna just a few more. And then People's General,
Hmm.
Panzer General 3D Assault. Now, logically,
Understandable, but still,
you would think that that would be Panzer General 3, right?
Oh dear God, it's one of the other ones, and it's the second one.
The next game they released is Panzer General 3 Scorched Earth.
Uh,
This game has the most
because
fucked
because
franchise ever. I love it. Okay.
because in some certain cases I can somewhat understand it. Kind of the marvelous case of depending on the studio or where the game was picked up, there's the chance that it could be renamed and pushed out in other sorts of cases from there. But also in the case of that, it's just like, oh my gosh, why certain game companies?
Also on September 30th, if you had a PlayStation 1, you could pick up a little game I've never heard of called Poi Poi.
Like, cool. So much fun.
Oh, you actually know this game.
Supposedly. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's the essentially series of kind of bubble bobble type game of shooting balls up at the
No, 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 no,
range
no. That's
after
Puyo
bumping them to
Puyo.
fall down. Hmm?
That's Puyo Puyo. This is something different.
Okay.
This is called Poi Poi. Which I understand how you got that confused because they sound very similar. But this look from the description, it sounds like it's kind of like Bomberman esque.
No, from the sounds of it, I might know about it because there's also the case of with how cutesy some of the things sort of look, there's about the 3,527 million other particular ones that are cutesy but have completely different game styles and whatnot. But this one specifically is a case of maybe I know it, but unless I see a picture, I'm probably not going to be sure.
And the final game we have on September 30th, if you're a PC gamer, you could pick up a little game called Total Annihilation.
Because it's a thing we need, supposedly.
Um, it's a real time strategy game that I've never heard of. And looking at the screenshots, it looks like a real time strategy game I've never heard of.
Mm. Decent amount of explosions are kind of like eh.
It's more like futuristic, so probably.
Mm.
I mean, it's probably fine. Like, let's look at reviews. Oh, I don't want to have to. I mean, it got good reviews. Like, I've just never heard of it.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let us talk about this episode of Reboot.
Oh my gosh, this episode of Reboot.
Okay, so Matrix, Andrea, and Frisket arrive in a system with a group of superhero-like beings, one of which has a resemblance to Bob. A dun dun dun. Okay,
Oh, this is gonna cause some things, isn't it?
so the majority of this episode is just a parody of original Star Trek.
Oh, to the nth degree, good sir.
Which, look, I have no problem because one of these superhero like beings is not at all trying to sound like James Tiberius Kirk.
What are you talking about? How could you possibly bring up that um, comparison between those two characters? They don't seem alike at all.
Nope, not at all. He doesn't exactly like try to copy William Shatner's speech patterns at all. Again, not really much happens in this episode. We get they kind of do some parody of like Star Trek and
Mhm.
like Justice League Avengers stuff, and
Yeah.
then basically the character that might well, it's not Bob but resembles Bob ends up dying, and then Enzo's all like, "Oh no, he wasn't Bob, but he was a friend or something," and that kind of is the episode.
Yeah, yeah. Well, aside that, and also the ultimate idea of, oh man, these two different societies of things, how could they supposedly work for stuff? But the case of they need to work together to make sure all the things go all nicely and the whatnot. It's not a problem that one other team is causing that causes them to go at each other's throats, but it's the one big bad within the series of viruses.
Yeah, yeah. But this just kind of seemed like a nothing episode to me. Like I'm like I like the Star Trek parody stuff because I kind of like Star Trek. Like I'm not a huge Star Trek guy, but like I've seen some of it
Mhm.
and I've enjoyed it. But I was like,
Mhm.
okay, like are we doing anything else this episode? Because like this is like a 22-minute episode, and you know,
Yeah. It was one of the interesting sort of things that I remember bits and pieces of this episode when I was a kid, but it was mostly just the case of, oh man, superheroes doing things. And it's like neat. But then also just the case of, wow, I hardly got anything from this episode when I was a kid. But again, with my experience with Star Trek, seeing the points and bits, and as well as just like, man, just a multitude of things. Star Trek, superhero concepts with each of the characters, and just the ideas that they sort of run through. It was interesting enough, but also kind of the case of we need to get an episode together. It's like, well, we have all these particular ideas that would be good for for good for a multitude of episodes, and just take them all and smush it into one. It's like, okay.
yeah, it's like I said, it's a fine episode. I just wish something else happened in it because it feels
Okay.
like we're not really moving the plot forward at this point. We're
Mm.
just kind of doing these like one-off episodes, and that's fine. But the last four episodes, like prior to the this one and the previous one, the last four episodes were very story heavy, and then taking all this time to like not really do any story stuff has kind of been like, I kind of want to get back to that.
And I think that's one of the big things, especially with this particular series of at least starter episodes. Because just with my knowledge of going through the series and whatnot, it's essentially going to be the story that we supposedly left. We are going to get back to it, but it's going to be some time. And a technical new story is going to be starting within these couple of episodes, but as of now, it hasn't happened just yet.
Yeah, that's absolutely the vibe I'm getting. Is like, okay, we have to like kill some time before the next storyline begins, so let's put together a couple of one-off episodes. Which,
Hmm.
like, I understand, like from a production standpoint that you have to do that. I'm just saying from a viewer from a viewer standpoint, I'm kind of like, I wish that like either that these were more engaging one-offs or that you had found a
Hmm.
way to just kind of give me a bit more story in them.
Hmm. And I think aside from this was just the concept and the idea of each of these systems that they're jumping to. With the past episode, it was similar to what was originally mainframe, like with the typical sprites, the one or two people, where jumping to this one, essentially in the beginning, all of them were essentially just spark-like characters until some people decided, hey, our system is being destroyed by these GameCubes dropping and us not being able to do anything about it. So some of you have to be like this. And they're like, okay, but after a certain amount of time, it's like, oh God, we don't want to be like this anymore. Do we want to go back? But it's like, hey, who's going to defend the system? It's like bringing up some interesting ideas for concerns of within that story, but also the case of this is only going to be a one-off and not going to be come back to in much of a case. Also, kind of the case of, we maybe could have used this better, possibly.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, it's a fine episode, and like, whatever.
And I think
Anyway,
aside from this, it brings up a couple interesting concepts with Matrix and Andrea's relationship as it sits, because Andrea goes to the opposite side. Matrix staying with the superheroes, Andrea helping out with the sprites within this episode to uh, figure out the real issue of what's going on, and showing sort of more of a separation from how she was first introduced, and especially from the last episode of saying that Matrix is looking for mainframe, and Andrea stays with Matrix, so keeps with his goals. That essentially explaining her origin, how things are, but also kind of giving the norm of she's been out and explored with Matrix, and all she wants to do now is to stay with him.
yeah, yeah. No, I don't even like. I have no problem with the relationship between Andrea and Matrix. I'm just like, I just want the story to move forward,
Yeah,
and I feel
yeah.
like that's not happening. Do you have anything else about this episode, Dave?
I think the only other thing is that just they're not new concepts with the superheroes and the type characters that they went with and decided with all the characters, but it was nevertheless fun to see all of them have specific interactions. And just the case of having those particular characters with their power set shows some of the advantages, some of the disadvantages, as well as the hidden aspect of the villains within the episode being on either side, causing issues for both. Just the case of interesting, but still kind of a case of you could take that idea and make it something more interesting.
Yeah, totally. So next week we'll be discussing the episode number 7.
Yes.
Okay, so entering a game, Matrix and Andrea find themselves back in Mainframe, where Bob and Dot mistake Matrix and Andrea, who are rebooted into Megabyte and Hexadecimal, trying to find the mysterious number 1. And this entire episode is apparently a reference to The Prisoner, so I will probably love it.
On some cases, I would not be surprised, but it's also kind of the case of, oh boy, what are you going to think about this episode? Because it goes through interesting sort of concept, but it also brings out one of my favorite things within this entire series. And it's just like, you can't wait to see this again.
Yeah, but it's referencing The Prisoner, Dave, and I love The Prisoner.
Okay, duly noted.
Anyway, until next time, I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.